Great, so welcome to Friday Live. Thanks everyone for joining in. Glad to see you here. Coronation weekend, so inevitably it's probably going to rain the rest of the weekend, but I hope everyone has a lovely, we had a good long weekend last weekend and there's another one coming now, so hopefully the weather holds, we get some time to get out and play. But today I'm just going to go through a couple of bits product-wise. Just got the Oban Airburst AK. Now this is the latest Airburst series. This is one that I had a chat with Ralph, who's president of Open Shafts in Orlando. This is the one where they've gone to Olympic for their top grade materials. Very much sort of materials along the sort of lines you'd use in fly fishing rods. You know, really great quality. And if you think the amount of fly fishing rod bends but doesn't break, that kind of tensile strength, the ability to move and twist and but maintain and recover. Really, that's one of the key things from a material point of view. So we're going to have a little bit of a review of that, and then the Axiom, the Velocore-based iron shafts, Fujikura Axioms. Going to go over those, compare to things like the MMT, and just give you a little bit of a pros and cons of the differences between them, and what we've been finding with these in the studio. So. First thing first, actually, I want to just touch on the Greece trip we just did to Costa Navarino. It was just a fabulous week. Already feels quite a long time ago, but had a great trip, 36 people over there. Utterly amazing resort we had. I want to thank everyone, anyone who, if they happen to be watching, thank you for coming. The group we had were just tremendous. Had a great time, everyone got on really well, or seemingly. And the pros for the coaching sessions, the clinics that they did, some amazing insights from some great players, Roger Chapman, Paul Nestling, and then Lewis and Stuart from a coaching point of view. I think there's so many things, one for us to learn for next time we go, May time next year. But an amazing resort, great quality golf courses and great quality people. So I had a fabulous week last week. Didn't get too burned, which was a nice plus. But I mean, one of the things that highlighted to me was going and playing, had a winter golf, or not playing too much here, and the sort of turf we get used to, the kind of contacts we get used to here, then going across to Greece in this instance, or you might find going down the Algarve. It's very hard to go cold into a round of golf without having got used to the different turfs. I certainly struggled. I know, Roger had some interesting shots, short wedge shots in the first round where just the grass type's so different. I think it really highlighted how much short game work the pros do when they're at different tournament venues. They're really dialing in their strike, and actually the best time you can spend is probably an hour or so around the chipping green and hitting short pitch shots and chips, getting used to the turf type. So that was, it reminded me I haven't at this time of year gone and played somewhere like that, or with turf types like that, and it really highlighted my poor wedge technique. But a couple of days in, you start to really get used to it. So a few things that were good reminders, but fabulous trip. And anyone interested for next year, let us know. But I think it might sell out pretty quick. Anyway, from golf trips into the equipment, I think we'll start off with the Axioms. Such a huge, I guess, noise about the Velocore Fujikura shafts, the Velocore materials, and really for those who aren't familiar with the Velocore material, it's a weave that's gone into the Ventus range of wood shafts. Again, massively successful, the Ventus and the TR series, that really stabilise the tip section. So actually, they're one of the few wood shafts where normally you would tip a shaft to stiffen it, and the reason that happens is that the parallel section of the shaft is down the bottom end, but it's the thinnest and the weakest part. So when people talk about tipping a shaft, it's shortening it, and by shortening it, you're shortening the weak section so it firms the tip up. Ironically, with the Velocore shafts, particularly the blue series, we know that by shortening it, you actually weaken it because you're taking out the stiff end of the shaft, you're taking out the stable material. So it behaves a little bit different to other materials, but it's been incredibly good for them from a performance point of view, and the consistency and stability of these shafts for both tour level players and amateurs alike. We've had great results in the fitting studio with them. So translating that into an iron shaft, it's quite interesting. It doesn't always track across. From a material and a tech point of view, you're looking for different things from iron shafts than for wood shafts because of the head sizes being much smaller on irons. So there's less gearing and twisting around the tip of the shaft. You think the centre of the back edge of a driver head is that far out from the tip of the shaft, and an iron head's there. So they're very different forces and levers and gearings on the shaft. So putting it into an iron shaft, hence it sort of took a couple of years to follow on. They had to really get it right. So I'm going to hit a couple of shots with this, but then also, and talk you through what the feel is relative to what they're designed to do, to performance aspects, and then compare them to the Mitsubishi, the MMT. So, similar sort of principle, the MMT metal mesh technology. That's also one where, into the tip end of the shaft, they've got a metal mesh that goes through the tip to strengthen it and stabilize it. And both do that job very well, but they create quite different sensations to swing with. So I'm going to start with the Axiom. I'm going to use the 105 because it's the closest to the weight that I play. So they do a 75, 105 and 125. Now, I'm not going to lie, the 125 is an absolute plank. It is in both shaft models, they are so stable. If you think with a steel to a graphite shaft, the reason for this is if I take the Axiom 125, and this is a 115 gram steel, the amount of material, if I angle that right, is that better? Sort of a little bit more? So really looking at how much wall material there is. So in the steel shaft on the bottom, the walls of the shaft are much thinner than the graphite shaft on the top. So what that means is that extra amount of material just makes the shaft structurally that much more rigid relative to weight. So when you go to a 125 gram composite shaft, a graphite shaft, the wall thickness adds to the rigidity, the structural strength. So that's why you normally find a crossover steel to graphite of around 85 to 95 grams, because by that stage, as you go into the graphites, there's a lot of wall material, and you can actually lose quite a bit of feel. That kind of twisting and loading of the shaft, that steel, the thinner walls will have a little bit more give and a little bit more play in them. So a heavier graphite often plays quite firm. But add to that the Velocore material, and it's an incredibly stable shaft. So one of the things that with the MMT and with this, they swing weight relatively heavy. So because you've got that structure and material in the tip end, the balance goes down the bottom end. So they tend to play, pretty stable to flex, but also the swing weight generally goes up about a point. For the Axioms in the 105, about a point and a half over your kind of Velocore's average steel shaft. So to swing with being 105, it's not a massively heavy dead weight of shaft. But certainly to hit with, for me, I can feel that bottom end wanting to drop in behind. And so you can see the shot peeling away a little bit to the right. So one of the things you get when you're going into this sort of style of shaft is it generally requires someone with a little bit more of an aggressive move, because you've got to work the bottom end through and fetch it through. But relative to a lot of other shafts, it's a very, very tight, stable feel through impact. So that shot there, I've kind of got to wait for it to get the club head through. But when you get to the ball, it's a really kind of strong feel through impact. Now, that isn't necessarily going to suit everybody, and this is why I think, for me, relative to weight, because they play quite stout, it's going to suit someone who's a little bit more of a hitter, someone who doesn't want to feel left. If you tend to hit a bit of a pole or tend to turn the shot over, a shaft like this is going to feel like it's not aggravating that. So you can definitely feel like you can work against the shaft. So if I put a bit more extra kick into the swing, then very, very stable. I had to feel like I worked the toe through a little bit more there. But there's no, some players might kind of feel pop or kind of wobble through the shaft. And so particularly relative to weight, they're going to feel very, very tight and stable. But it's kind of an odd one without necessarily feeling dead. They haven't made the handle end really, really stiff, but certainly make the swing weight go up a little bit. And if I go into the MMT, so again, it's sort of two shafts, two brands, in some respects variations around the same theme, adding material, so the mesh in this to stabilize it. In the MMT, what you get is actually a slightly stronger change in swing weight. So swing weight on the MMT is at the same weight as half a point, 3/4 point heavier than the Axiom, which is already relatively heavy. These are the 105s, just comparing the 105s in both. So on a something like if you take an Oban CT115, that in this head is swing weighting at D0.5, D1. It's D3, 3 and 3.3 in the Axiom, and it's D4.5, 4.6 in the MMT. So that isn't something. What that relates to is the fact that the balance point in the MMT and in the Axiom are nearer the bottom end, which tends to make them quite, it's not unique, but very particular to a player's action. So, in something like the 105 gram weight, there's not a massive amount of raw weight, it's quite a mid-weight stuff. It's not a massive amount of weight at the top end, but it's very much bottom end balanced. So going into the MMT, it has a bit of a heavier feel to waggle. You can really sense the weight on the bottom end. Again, structurally very, very stable. There's a bit of a different feel, but I think, again, still very tight through impact. But for me, with this one, what happens is that bottom end starts to get a little bit more laggy. So I've then got to work it to bring the club head through. So you tend to find with the MMTs, when they work for someone, they work incredibly well. But they're quite binary. They really work or they really don't work. But if you have a little bit of a pull on the handle, don't need a massive amount of weight and need that club to drop in, that's where this shaft does it brilliantly well. So a bit of a different sound, bit of a deeper note. Very, very similar numbers, but the shaft structure, they're going to produce similar numbers because they're structurally very, very stable in terms of what they're both trying to achieve. But they both swing very differently to steel. So it's much more along the lines of if you were to put it into sort of steel shaft balance, you'd be looking at maybe a Modus 105 in the X-Flex or a Dynamic Gold 105, getting that balance down the tip end. But because there's more material in there, they structurally feel very, very stable. So when you go into the lighter weights, it's easy to generate a little bit of speed, but again, you've got that balance in the bottom end. So really, really stout, really stable. I think using these sort of multi-material structures is really where kind of graphite, particularly iron shafts, composite iron shafts are going. But at the moment, they're tending towards being very, very strong, very stable feel, which not everyone is actually going to feel like they get a huge amount of response from. So that's probably where if you're someone looking for a strong feeling shaft, those are the kind of ones to go to, whereas actually a steel shaft of similar weight, you're going to get a little bit more responsiveness from. Yeah.
Turn my microphone on. Now you get to see me behind the camera. Okay, some questions. Mike T, any news on Oban Cobalt 39 gram driver?
Yes, that literally landed the other day. That is going to be going into the demo rack very, very shortly. I mean, that's one of the shafts being worked on. We got the AK out just partly because it's one that I really wanted to test for my own. But that came the same delivery yesterday, or the other day. So those will be in the demo matrix for next week. Very, very light. I mean, it's incredible how light a 39 gram shaft feels in terms of pickup. It'll be fascinating to hit it. If it's the Mike, I think he's in the back. If it's Mike Theodoro, he's in the back end of next week or Wednesday to test it out. So it is here and ready.
Cool. I was just giving myself a bit of saturation there because I was looking ill. Right. Tom Vaughan thought the clinics were very good, very informative and fun. Thank you very much. Mike T also asks again, PXG irons, how do they compare?
PXG irons. If you mean within themselves in terms of the range, it depends whether you mean between them and other brands or within their own models. So in terms of how they compare between their own models, the XP is not quite as clunky as it was. If you just drop us
a note and let us know, if you just sort of expand on what you said, then we can answer that for you.
Yeah, I'll go between the models. I mean, the XP isn't quite as, I don't think quite as clunky as it did last model. I think certainly from a sound and feel point of view, it's a little bit softer, but very strong. The 6 iron lofts down at 24.5, 25 degrees on the XP, so it is very strong lofted. The P, we've done a reasonable amount of. Their irons are still very, very well constructed, and I think that's one thing that they've always got to be given credit for, is the quality of materials they use and the construction, the design is great. I think the miss at the moment is the T model isn't in there. The P still, I mean, the ball speed off their faces is very good. It's just whether there's enough spin for players. They're quite a low spin model, so I think it's a shame the T isn't in there, because you go from the P to the ST, which is the sort of the blade blended into a sort of you might call it a muscle cavity.
That Mike's saying to each other, P versus XP, etc.
So XP, I mean, the loft is very strong on the XP, so they're both very good for ball speed. We see really good ball speed efficiency off both. The P, it's being a little bit more lofted and designed not quite for so much distance, it retains a little bit more spin, but it is a little bit. They're both still pretty strong flight. But I think the P, the stand loft's 27, 28, and the XP's down at 25. So there's a little bit of, depending on what flight you want. The XP's still slightly lighter head frame weight, so their stand length on the XP is still a little bit longer. So it's kind of like the XPs are almost 5 to pitch wedge with a 6 to A wedge number on them, with for head weights and loft a kind of more traditional 5 to pitch. So it's a little bit of, yeah, all the brands are doing it. The Paradigm X are the same thing without the head weight being lighter. All the brands are doing it to try and get it feeling good to hit it a long way. But the kicker is the spin, and if there's not enough spin, then you're not going to control it into the green.
Okay, Dave Hurley, thanks for joining us again. Is 14 degrees bounce on my 54 degree wedge too high for summer months in the UK?
The answer is I don't know. It is quite a lot. So without knowing someone's delivery patterns, shaft lean, how shallow you are, whether you open the face up, there are so many caveats that go into it. It is depending on the width of the sole as well. That's the other bit. So if you take the Vokey models, you've got the 14F, which is a more kind of neutral width, more like the S grind, and then you've got the K at 14. Now there's still quite a lot of bounce. I mean, realistically, there's still quite a lot of bounce for UK summers. And David, if I'm right, I think you play South Coast way. So if you're where I think you are, it's firmer turf, and so yeah, in summer that's going to play quite a lot. There are some players that it really suits. If you get very on top and drive down onto it, then the bounce can help. But a lot of the time for summer months here, we find ourselves softening the back edges. So something on, if you need the width of the K, we'll tend to find ourselves chamfering the back edge and rounding it to let the club slide through. Whereas in the US, where it's softer turf, you might need that back edge to stop it digging. So for UK turfs, it is a reasonable bit. And so the caveat is, depends whether it's an F style kind of mid to narrow sole shape or a K style wide, and that
it's the 54 14F.
Yeah, so if you've got a higher loft wedge with less bounce, then you can get away with it. But if you open your face at all, or you like to play chip shots with hands more level with the ball, then the bounce is going to have quite an effect. So it could well still be a little bit strong.
Okay.
So maybe, definitely maybe, effectively.
Ian M, welcome back from your golf trip. Any recommendations for a high balance shaft for a tailor-made mini driver? I
mean, it's really, to a point, it's more whether a high balance shaft suits you rather than the head. But I mean, it depends how high you want. So the highest balance shaft around is pretty much the VA Nemesis. That's got a kind of smooth feel, but that's quite a high balance shaft. I think anything, you've got the Devotion HB or the Kyoshi HB from Oban, the Hazardous Blue from Project X, that's quite a relatively high balance. Acura do the RPG HBP for high balance point. Let's think through. Fuji don't really do a counterbalance shaft. If you're looking for a decent value mid to upper balance shaft, then the VRTX Blue, that's quite a stout feel, but that's a good value shaft. A lot of the counterbalance shafts tend to go quite dear because of the materials required in the tip. Quality's got to be good if you're moving material back up the shaft. It's easy to make a shaft stout at the wide end, so you don't need high grade materials for that, but you do need high grade materials for stable at the bottom end, especially if you're removing material from it. So most of them tend to be quite dear. The VRTX is less dear, but not quite as counterbalanced, but that's quite a good option.
Yeah, Ian was saying that he's got an Acura RPG high balance in his driver, was considering all dealer Rogue white.
That's certainly not a high balance shaft. The Rogues tend to be quite tip balanced and tip strong. So certainly historically they've all been that way. So again, depends what sort of weight you're looking at. But the RPG is not a cheap shaft. So it depends kind of what budget you'd want to go to. But I probably wouldn't go the Rogue white. That's still going to have a reasonable bit of balance in the tip section. Yeah, it depends what sort of price bracket you want to go to.
Okay, Aidan, thanks for joining us again. Do you think the Axiom will end up in driving irons on tour? Is it close to any iron model bend profile or feel?
The feel's quite different. I think bend profiles are yeah, there are a lot of tip stiff bend profiles out there. I think, yeah, it's quite a distinct chance that 105 will go in some driving irons on tour, very, very much so. It's the only question mark would be whether the player might want a little bit more feedback from it. But as a driving iron, it's generally not something they're that fussed about. So things like the nip on the Ghost shaft, that's the steel core graphite on the top. That's sort of swings a little bit heavier, but not quite as stiff a feel in the tip. So I could certainly see that as a driving iron shaft. I think it's a slight shame you go from 75 to 105. I think there's just such a big gap there. Inevitably they will plug it at some point, but yeah, I can certainly see the 105 going in driving irons. I think due to it feeling just a little bit stiffer than steel, but being a shaft designed for irons, and they do the long iron, mid iron and short iron shaft in it, so they don't do 3 iron, 4 iron, 5 iron, 6 iron discrete lengths. They do a long iron shaft for effectively 3, 4, 5 iron, mid iron for 6, 7, or 5, 6, 7, 6, 7, 8, I think and then at the 9 pitch wedge shaft. So they do 3 batches. So the longer iron ones almost certainly be used in driving irons, yeah.
Okay. Again, please do fire in your questions, guys and girls,
Yeah,
because
whatever they are,
you do make the show. I guess we can call it a show, can't we?
Yeah, I guess so. Call it
So
what you
our
like.
our next Monday Live
As long
will
as it's
be.
polite.
We're going to move from Friday to Monday, 6 p.m. To recap on things from the weekend, and hopefully we can catch some of you at home after work or on the journey home. So that'll be starting Monday 15th, I believe.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Would Axiom be a different feel to KBS Prototype?
Yeah, it is. I mean, the KBS Prototype is still, in terms of the hybrid shaft, if that's will be the one you mean, because that is the Proto one. That's still quite I still think it's stiffer in the tip. Axiom's definitely has a little bit. It's a very, very stable tip section by nature of the Velocore material. So yeah, that's still going to feel like the tip just clings on a little bit more. Probably a little bit more tip balanced. But again, I think because the Prototype shaft is a hybrid shaft, whereas the Axiom is iron shaft. And I think that's the differentiation. It's designed for iron heads, so that tip just hanging on a little bit more. So yeah, it will just feel a little bit firmer in the tip section, yeah.
Daniel Lane, would be good. What would be good irons to look at as a neutral progression from 2021 P790s? My ball striking has improved a lot over the last 18 months, and I really want more control, and I think that's saying precision.
I mean, a natural one would actually be a P770. I mean, it's a slightly, so the 770 is a kind of, not watered down, but a toned down P790. It depends how much progression you want, but something like a 770 isn't a bad shout. I think if you're looking at other brands, if you wanted a softer feel, MP223, that's still got a bit of performance to it as well. Ball speed maybe not quite as strong, but that's a good head. But that'll definitely feel softer. T100S, that's got a little bit of punch, slightly clickier note, but again, there's good ball speed off that head. So the 770 and the 100S, you're not going to drop too much ball speed from, but you do lose a little bit of the variability off the face, and they progress into the short irons just a little bit more. Those will probably be the two natural ones, but depending on how much progression off of that head you want, the Mizuno might fall into that as well, I think.
Mike T, we're off to Costa Navarino later in the year. Any tips and recommendations? Well, I can recommend the Wagyu hot dog in flames. It was fantastic.
I think the one thing I would say, so the Bay and the Dunes course the greens are much more severe. So the hills and the Olympic course up on the top of the hill, they're the newest two. And their green, certainly the turf's a little bit firmer. It's a bit more like, I like to, with my wedge shots, I like to kind of put the ball back in my stance and drive it in. I could do that on that turf up there. And the greens are a little bit less grainy and a little bit flatter. So, but I think with the Bay and the Dunes course, I think it really is a case of get on the practice green, the chipping green actually down on the dunes, down by the practice ground, and go around there and get used to the turf. The sand's much softer down there. They're going to be renovating the bunkers on the hills, probably the Olympic, but the hills course definitely later in the year. because there were some bunkers with a huge amount of sand in. But that's something they are going to work on. But yeah, I think it's the key thing with those two courses. You've got to know where to miss them. So they actually take playing the course once, then you start to feel like you know based on pin positions where you can and can't miss them. So I made the mistake of on par 5 on the Dunes course. It was a 3-tier green. I only thought it was a 2-tier green, and the pin was just above the first tier. So I made sure I didn't go short, and then knackered myself because I then had to come down a tier, and it was a horrible putt. So knowing where to miss them on the greens is really key in terms of approach shots in, because you can have some horrible putts on those. But yeah, practice, getting used to kind of breaking putts and fast downhill putts. But they're really fun courses. So I think just enjoy them. There is sort of margin for error around those two courses in particular, but they're each one's quite different. But just enjoy the experience. There's a great team there. Yeah.
Sorry, Stu, I missed a few of your questions here. Could you explain how a fairway shaft is heavier than a driver shaft when it is cut to length, when the same blank shaft is used to fairway woods and drivers, as more length is cut off for a fairway wood, so it's lighter?
That wouldn't actually happen. So what you generally find happens, if you're taking the same raw shaft, the more you trim off it, the lighter it's going to get. So what you generally find is 99% of the time you go a heavier fairway shaft, the base weight is heavier than the driver. And actually the reason for that is exactly what you said, is because you're trimming more length off, you're taking more weight off. So the cut weight will still be a little bit heavier than the driver, but because there's a little bit less, intensity on the swing, on the driver you're teed up and you're really kind of going for it, the slightly lighter raw weight comes through with the swing. And then as you go into a fairway, you're squeezing the ball a bit more, you're using the weight to get onto the top of it a bit more, but the shorter length pulls some dead weight off the shaft. So you'll see a gradual progression, but it's in the same way that iron shafts within a set, if you go from 4 iron to 5 iron to 6 iron, if they're a taper tip set, they gradually get slightly heavier for exactly the same reason, so that you're moving a similar mass. So that's why 90% of the time you'll see, let's say, a 65 gram shaft in a driver, and you're going to go 73 to 75 gram in the fairway. The amount of weight difference between the shafts once cut is not that much, but there's normally always a bit of progression in weight as you go from driver to fairway to hybrid to irons. That's why you see that upward trend.
And a second half of his question also, does a more upright lie angle increase spin and a flatter lie decrease spin with irons and drivers?
No. No, it won't affect, if you're only changing lie, then it won't affect, it could very, very, very slightly affect spin, but you're going to affect, on irons you're going to affect the more loft there is. I'm going to get a tool here just to display it. So the more loft there is, the more you turn that up. As I turn the lie upright, it points more this way. As I flatten it, it points of square to slightly right. Now, that's purely because of the loft. What it doesn't really change is backspin. So where it's going to affect spin is really cleanliness of strike. The cleaner your contact, the more spin you're going to get, because you're going to get more interaction with the face. And particularly on a wood, you wouldn't be changing the lie to alter backspin. You'd be changing the lie. Normally you'd go upright just to bring the toe in a little bit, brings the center of gravity slightly closer to the hosel, makes it slightly easier to bring the toe through. And flatter, you're moving the center of gravity away from the shaft a little bit more, and therefore you're creating a little bit more gearing, and it holds the toe a little bit more open. And there's a fractional effect on that face angle through the loft. But when you're getting down to a driver, it's similar to a putter, you can change lie a long way before it has a noticeable effect on actual shot shape because of gearing and face angle. It's that CG that changes, that helps you either square the toe a little bit more easily, or the flatter lie that kind of holds it, that gears it a little bit more, and effectively acts like a slightly heavier or lighter swing weight more than anything else.
Where's that question gone? Andy Corso, any thoughts on graphite putter shafts? Have you seen much uptake?
Putter shafts are an interesting one because the theory behind it is when you go into graphite, you've got, like we're saying with the iron shafts, you've got more material and you can stiffen it up and you can reduce twisting. And in theory, that means a better energy transfer. So the stiffer the shaft, the better energy transfer to the ball. A little bit less play technically holds the face a little bit squarer. What changes is the weight positioning. So what you tend to see, I mean, the answer is no, there's not a lot of uptake with it, because steel, the natural balance point's a little bit more down the bottom, in the same ways with iron shaft. You know, the thinner the walls are, you've got to reinforce the tip section. They've got to have proportionately a little bit more material down there to get that stability. And from a putting point of view, if you're technically very, very good or putt on very fast greens, then you've got a very, very neutral stroke, and there's no real kind of hit to it. So actually, in composites or graphites, the balance point's nearer your hands. You're not needing that weight to keep the putter in plane or to hit against. So a lot of the tour players will get away with it more because they're putting on much quicker greens, they need less acceleration. But technique-wise, they're much quieter technique, so you're not using the weight of the bottom half to swing the putter. With steel, most amateurs have a slight kind of quirk, so we've seen kind of all sorts of weird and wonderful actions. We've all seen them on the greens. Sometimes you have to turn away so you can't see it. But what the weight in the bottom end does actually sometimes helps the putter track back and through a little bit more. In the same way in the swing and full swings, you can use some of that weight to keep the club tracking back and through. The putter is just a shorter version of that. So I swing the putter head. I'm quite right-handed. I have a little bit of lead lag in my stroke. I have to have weight in the bottom end. I cannot use a composite putter shaft with any accuracy, particularly on shorter putts. So it's really about that. The theory of the putter shafts being stiffer in the composites makes sense, but in reality, there aren't that many amateurs that it makes a big difference for. But it's more about, yes, there's data to prove that technically there's less twisting, that technically you get slightly better robot data out of one, but that's a robot, not a human. And I've seen 95% of humans better in a steel shaft than a graphite when it comes to putters. And it's purely a timing and tempo thing. Yeah.
Okay. Richard Ticehurst, can you recommend a similar alternative to KBS dollar taper light shafts?
So the dollar taper lights tend to be around the 100 gram mark, 95, 100 grams. So you've got the KBS Tour lights. They're not technically quite as stiff playing. But you've got the KBS Tour light that are the Regs 95, the Stiff 100, the X105. You've got the Tour V in the regular, that's more of a stiff tip. That's the regular's 100 grams. Those would be the two closest ones in a steel. It's no great surprise they're the same brand. KBS have generally been quite good at not being tip heavy with their steel, apart from the C-Taper series. But those are going to swing the most similarly. It depends whether you want a slightly kind of softer feel, technically a little bit more kick and a little bit more flight, which would be the Tour Light. The Tour V is designed around a stiffer tip and a little bit of a stronger spin profile, but those two are going to be the closest.
Okay, I like this question from Dave Mack. Will the proposed ball rollback have any future implications to future shaft developments?
Shaft development's not really, because they're already designing, shaft profiles for pretty much every player, every eventuality. The owner of VA Composites basically said it's a 46-inch tube. There's only so many things you can do with how it bends. What it would change is more the head tech, I think. It's kind of thing. Head tech and shaft tech is a little bit reactive one to another. Most of the changes in club heads have necessitated changes in shafts to deal with the bigger club heads, the bigger, the more, the deeper CGs, kind of going stiffer and stiffer and lower torque, higher grade materials to kind of cling onto the head, particularly in drivers, and stop them deflecting and stop them quite as much give and move, movement in the bottom end. I'd be amazed if the rollback actually happens, mainly because I think if you take golf as a sport and all the things that happened over the years, the longest hitters are still going to be the longest hitters. I think if they can punish a miss hit a little bit more, rather than just try to roll distance back, I think that probably has a little bit more bearing. There's a little bit more. You can take that across all stands as a golfer. But if it does happen, I can't see the shaft profile having a huge effect, simply because how much it changes the delivery of the club head is really quite small. So for us, when we're fitting shafts, yes, if someone likes a firmer feel, you're going to go a stiffer tip. Or if you're trying to bring launch and spin down a little bit, yes, you try and stiffen the tip a little bit or go a lower torque shaft. But the most important thing is how it helps you deliver the club head, not how much extra launch and spin a certain shaft's going to give you. If you time it well, you're going to square the face up, you're going to get efficient contact, you're going to put you're going to get the best out of whatever head's on the bottom. So most of the difference is in flight to react to what the ball does. I think you're going to see from club head design, not shaft design.
Whilst you were on the topic of graphite putter shafts, Daniel has asked, would the same apply to the stability putter shaft with that being made of both steel and graphite?
It still applies, but just not quite as much, because you've still got a steel tip on there. You've still got that little bit of balance down the bottom end, but you are again, you're going to a stiff, I guess composite is relatively counterbalanced to steel. You're still losing some of that feel and weight, and some of it is a feel thing. It's from a tempo and I guess a flow point of view would be the best way to describe it. Some of it's the mass, and some of it's actually having a little bit of feedback from the shaft actually can help you feel the stroke a little bit more. You're actually getting a little bit of sensation for where the putter face is. It's all about kind of feedback, and the more rigid you go in the shaft, actually the less feedback for the putter head you're going to get. So if you have a more if one better phrase, sort of robotic, a kind of a still kind of dead action where everything's kind of locked and it's just dead back and through, then potentially you're going to have less, it's going to affect you less than someone who has a little bit more of a lag and a flow. So somebody, Crenshaw is very kind of soft hands, your Seve, face opens and closes Tiger, closes the face in. There's a little bit of open close to the stroke. And then you get other someone like Harrington, who's kind of much more kind of down the line. His centre shaft is much more, I guess you call it mechanical. That kind of putter shaft might well suit that sort of action a little bit more, have less of a loss of feedback and feel. So it's a mixture of the balance and the flow of it, but also then the amount of sensation you get back from it, and that's then the kind of the personal element. But I think you still do lose some of that feel for the club head end of the shaft by going to a composite, whether it's a stability where it's a conjoined steel tip and composite top half, or basically an all composite shaft down. The shame with some of the graphites is that they, because of how many bends, single bend, double bend insertions, overfits, there are so many variables to it that most of them will only go in a kind of a straight in plumber's neck style, where there's an actual kind of a hosel hole to put it into. There are a couple that are overfit, a couple. I think LAB do a couple, but LA do a couple, but they're just not. They're not very versatile. So there are so few putters that actually fit. It makes it quite hard to, if you're really fitting a putter, normally it's got to be a very small kind of window of head styles that you can actually put one in as well, which also makes it a little bit harder.
Okay, Andrew Evans, playing Apex 19s. I have weakened lofts and now playing Pro V1X. 6-iron average spin is still 4,000, max height 70 feet, club speed 84 miles an hour, launch at 15 degrees, club path -2. Is the club just too low spinning for me?
I'd be great on a links into wind, but if you're looking to get realistically, for getting control into greens, especially once we're I was about to hoon it down for the next week and soften everything off again. But once the ground firms up, then it's going to be noticeable that you're just not going to have that bit of stop on the green. Now, some of it's the construction. Any head you put tungsten in the sole, the lower you put the centre of gravity, the more weight you put in the bottom, then the more likely you are to strike the ball above the centre of gravity line. So that then means that as you strike it above that line, the head gives that way a bit and the ball gears down the face, you lose spin. So all of these heavy sole, strong lofted irons, they say, the weight in the sole launches it high. It might help get a bit of launch, but you lose spin as a result. And I think there is an element where, there are going to be heads, with what you've described. It's not like you're heavily inside and closing the face down to create that low spin. You might just be naturally quite a low spin player. So if you're already weakened the lofts off, then really head style is the only thing that's likely to increase your spin. You're using the Pro VX, which is a higher spin ball, which is absolutely the route we'd go down, advice-wise. But you'd probably be looking at things like, depending on ball striking side of it, you look at I-230 something like that, just to help pick that flight up, or I mean, I'm hitting one of the proto concepts, or depending how much you wanted to spend on Ironhead, the proto concepts that keep a little bit of flight and keep a bit of spin and keep that sort of softer forged feel. Even something like a Mizuno MP223 would spin. It won't necessarily launch as high as the 230, but it would spin a little bit more. But you're likely to, if loft stayed the same, I'd say the 230 would probably pick up a degree or so of launch. Be great if it was a bit more. Probably pick up 400 or 500 revs of spin. So that's all going to help you get towards like an 75 to 80 foot peak height. If you can get 4,500 revs on spin, then anything's a help. But that's the heads aren't helping you generate spin, that's for sure.
Okay, last question I can see at the moment. Nick West, thanks for your question. I play the Epic Max driver with a Proforce VTS Black. My driving has improved a lot in the last 2 years. Would I see much of a gain in ball speed with a non-max model? Spin averages around 2,200.
In theory, well, much of a gain, probably not. It depends what sort of efficiency numbers you're getting, but the spin's in a really nice window. Based on kind of, if we were talking to neutral deliveries and very much kind of average patterns, it's not crazy low. There's enough spin there, but it's low enough to get some good run out. So the one thing that you stand to potentially lose is a bit of forgiveness, and two, if you go too low on spin, you're going to lose carry. So there's always a happy medium to be found. If you're hitting it consistently, you're hitting lots of fairways, if you're getting good smash factor, you're getting good representative ball speeds of say 147 on a TrackMan, 147 plus in terms of efficiency, then the danger is you go chasing that kind of low spin bomber and actually then lose consistency. And fairways found is massive. If you're finding a lot of fairways, then there is that way up of, okay, if there's 10 yards extra in there without hitting it off the planet, then potentially that could be worth a change. But if you're good ball speed, and if the flight's in a good window, the chances are the amount you're likely to gain isn't worth the potential risk of either knuckling the spin off and losing carry, or losing a little bit of consistency by chasing that a little bit more distance. So it really, I think the answer really boils down to how good is the smash factor, that efficiency value, ball speed to club speed. If that's good, if that's sort of say 146, 47 plus, up to 150, then I would say you're likely to not have much to gain out of that. It's always one of those, say, like I've been having my driver, everyone wants to see me. I will be doing the driver fit soon, but there's not an awful lot for me to gain other than forgiveness. Now, if you've got a max, you've already got quite a forgiving head. So I think, weigh up the smash factor, and then, based on that, if you're at 143, 44, then you've got probably 3 or 4 miles an hour ball speed to gain. That's 6 or 7 yards straight out of the gate. And it's worth comparing with modern models. If you're a 148 efficiency and 14 launch, 2-2 spin, chances are you've got 5 or 6 yards max, and then you've got to weigh up. If you're hitting it consistently, is it worth chasing those extra 5 or 6 yards?
Okay, I did see another question here that I missed. Stuart S, great live session, thank you. My son is 6'2" and relatively new to the game. Going by static measurements suggests plus ½ inch. Any advice for trying this on the cheap, or would advice be to leave as is for now?
I assume leaving as is means standard length. I think it depends how new to the game he is, and depends. Did he say how old he is?
No.
No. So, well, one, is he going to do any more growing? I think where if there's more growth to come, then possibly hold fire, and that goes hand in hand with how old is he. And part of it depends how much extra strength is he going to develop. So again, if he's late teens already, chances are he's a good way through most of that development. The other element is how much is he going to play. If he's just getting into it, then I would probably not do anything quite yet. But absolutely, he's going to need longer than standard. Most likely, unless he's got exceptionally long arms, if he's sort of fairly neutral proportions or got longish legs, then he'll need a good ½ inch longer than standard, maybe even 3/4. But you've got to go the custom route, even if it's getting a fitting somewhere to get an option that's worth going to. So I think it's making sure that it's going to be worth the investment to do it. Chance of if you try and do it too cheap, you'll just end up doing it twice and pay as much as doing it properly once. So I would make sure he's committed to playing, and then if you're going to do it properly, and then give him something he can really develop with, rather than do it cheap again. You know, you'll end up pretty much. Chances are, if you try and do it too cheap, especially when you're going to the longer lengths, the chances are he's not going to enjoy it as much. He might then decide he doesn't like it too much. Either stunt the development, or you end up doing it twice where you could have done it once, and give him something that he can develop with. So yeah, I think make sure he's committed to the game and then do it properly once.
Any opinions on the new Cobra King Tour irons? Some reviews saying they are quite forgiving for their size, but low launch.
Low launch, they absolutely are not. If it's the King Tour with a slight cutout in the back, they are pretty forgiving for their shape. They fall right into that bracket of the MP223, T100, 100S, into that kind of bracket. So they're still very much a player's iron. Really nice, neat shape. Just making sure I'm not going to kick a TrackMan. Really nice, neat shape. I think they've done a great job with how the three heads, the MB, the CB, and the King Tour head, blend together. Hence, you're going to see quite a lot of combo sets between them. But low launching, they absolutely are not. If someone says they're low launching, then I don't know what head they're testing, because they definitely retain some flight and spin. And that's actually, it's quite a nice differential between the 100S T100S, which is quite a powerful flight. And if you get someone who needs to retain a bit of flight, then the King Tour's a great head. So no, they're definitely upper mid launch and good mid spin. But yeah, no, I mean, they're not a massively forgiving head, but they've got a decent bit of performance to head shape. Yeah, nice, really nice soft feel as well. So done a great job, Cobra, with those.
Okay, I think we're pretty much up to speed with all the questions. Last one here is, and if there's any product you want to see tested, we've got 15 minutes left. Simon will.
I can do a little bit of a talk through that new Oban shaft.
Okay, so let's quickly just finish off with the questions down. We will continue to answer any questions that come through offline. Dave, am I correct in believing that the trend seems to be towards lighter shafts? Is this based on an aging golf profile, or it delivers the best results for the average golfer?
So you're seeing it across the board, really. Particularly in driver shafts. If you look at tour driver shafts, a lot of them are in 65 gram shafts now, where they used to be in 75, 80 gram shafts. So some of it is down to technique changes. So if you go back a load of years, everything was heavy. So part of it is one thing affects the other, but when everything was heavy, it was that kind of Nicklaus would drive the legs and then hit with the hands. But the moment you drive the legs, you go lateral, so you need the weight to drop it in, and then you've got to use your hands to square it. Now we're going much more about functional speed. So working on rotation, so turning around that posture, loading up and whipping through. So the moment you start to put snap into it, then if you go heavy, you just leave it behind. So unless you're physically very strong, which is why the top players are still playing some fairly heavy weights, because the core strength, their physical strength, there's loads of explosives. They're all in the gym now. Even some of the guys that don't look like it are doing some gym work. So the top players can still handle a reasonable bit of shaft weight in their irons, so that kind of 120 to 130 gram shaft weights. But what we are saying here, functionally, a move which is more rotational, is if you set your spine angle and you work around that, it's a far clean. You're working around a single plane, so actually less can go wrong if you're working down a single plane and using your spine angle to do it. But the only way you can generate that speed through kind of using the ground, you're kicking back off, but staying more centered, is that the club comes with you. So for amateur golfers, yeah, we are seeing lighter, partly because there are lighter options. There are more lighter options available now, and more of the brands have them in their fitting carts. So you're seeing the 95, 100, 105 gram shafts, where they used to only see the 115, 120 plus. So they're more available, but it suits most golfers more, and it suits a more biomechanically sound move as well. As one kind of comment on something I saw recently reported on, is there's one move that scares me to death with that we're seeing more and more and more from players trying to force every ounce of speed out of it. And that, if you look at Mito Pereira, Joaquim Niemann, Sam Bennett, it was Sam Bennett actually, there's a photo of him at Impact, at the Masters, and he's got a massive hip clearance, but his spine's rounded right like that. And that scares me to hell and back, because the moment you put force there and your head's going down, the amount of torsion and rotation on that mid-back, something's going to give at some point, and it scares me to death that a load of young players are going to be doing that, trying to squeeze every last mile an hour out their swing, but not looking at functioning how their body's moving, and that back, those discs are going to go at some point. So it's kind of getting into that. I guess if we've seen it in so many other sports, you know, the American football, rugby, all the kind of power-based sports, is people go big, hit hard, get hurt, have short careers, and my, you know, if anyone's looking at swings that are worth going to, I know we're going on a slight tangent here, but you've got your, you know, Adam Scott's, where it's beautifully in plane all the way back through, but actually for amateurs, Francesco Molinari, you know, because there's less of that what we call X factor in terms of hip rotation, that snap which puts that load on the spine. He's very much connected, so you tend to see he's really nicely, he doesn't have that left heel comes up, goes there, goes down, goes through it, and he's so well synced up, and it's such a simple looking action because he uses his frame well. For me, that's the kind of action that amateurs should look at, rather than, yeah, your Roys and things where they've got huge flexibility and range of motion. Most of us sit in well, I don't, I'm fortunate, I'm very lucky I stand up most of the day, but most of amateur golfers and you guys out there sit at a desk most of the day. That doesn't lead to mobility. So I think, you know, so to go back to the question, lighter weights are more available, but actually that functional movement of working around your spine and working on a more uniform plane, that actually suits generating some speed, but you need a lighter weight to go alongside that. I went on a bit soapbox there.
A few people that want to see you hit the Airburst.
Oh, the Airburst, yeah. So what I'm going to do first up is, well, I've got both Airbursts. I think on the Airburst, yeah, when I talked to Ralph about it at the beginning of the year, I'm not going to lie, when I was thinking about doing a drive for myself, that shaft, I thought, I really hope that works for me. Because one, it looks, I mean, from a finish point of view, I don't know how easy it is going to be to catch the finish.
Yeah, that's good.
You can see the weave, and it just looks cool. And the fact that it's, yeah, this is not a shaft they're expecting to sell many of. It is a very expensive shaft. It's an $1,100 shaft, like an £900 shaft. But they kind of went to Olympic and they said, look, let's just go there with the materials. Let's just go all the way with it. And, you know, it's a case of, it's a bit of a showcase. It's a right, what can we do? What's possible? So the original, you know, the Cobalt and the Burgundy Airbursts are still not exactly cheap at the sort of £500 or £600 mark, but are still very, very good materials. They just, whoop, good catch. They just really went there with these ones and went, you know, way out there and said, okay, whatever it is, whatever's the best, this is what it's going to be. So I hit a couple with the original Airburst blue.
They've even made a fly rod, haven't they?
Yeah, they have actually. They're going to be retailing a fly rod with it. So yeah, and it's the reason why the fly fishing rods are used, or is a sort of a marker point, is one, the amount of, you know, when you see how much kind of bowing of the shaft of the rod, they get very, very fine at the tip end and they go over on themselves, but they don't snap. So there's so much elasticity to them. There's so much you know, movement out of the. Sorry, James, I hope I haven't just knackered something on your thing.
No, all good.
Yep. There's so much bending and torsion and movement out of them. That's such a fine, I guess you call it shaft width, wall thickness, but no breakages on them. So what you can do from a profile point of view, from a material point of view, allows them to just kind of go, they aren't necessarily changing bend profiles too much, but it allows you to go much, much finer layers and control that shaft so much more. So actually some of it's a feel side of things, but you know, really it's things like, you know, energy transfer efficiency, allows them just to go a little bit more efficient on that. So the Cobalt Airburst C5 is more like 66, 67 grams. Swings sort of fairly stable on the tip, but to hit with, it's just I've got to move now. You know, it's stable feel. I wouldn't call it. It's still quite a stout feel. It's not as sort of firm as you might say something like that Axiom shaft feels. There's still a little bit of load and give through it, but at impact, when you go to really high grade materials, it's a really tight feel through the ball. So it doesn't necessarily feel hard. it allows them to, the better material, the higher grade they can go, you get a little bit more load, a little bit more feedback. When it gets to impact, it has that crispness to it. And that's what, from a field point of view, one tends to find with it. So I can certainly feel through that part of the shaft load a little bit more. This one's got a little bit of feedback, a little bit of balance towards the tip end, but say a little bit of feedback to it. I'll take that for 2 swings, having stood talking for an hour. Let's give that one more. So it's fractionally on the heavy side for me, fractionally, but certainly take those 3. You can definitely feel a little bit of load and give through that lower midsection there. So the Airburst the AK in the 65, the stiff which I got here, these are both stiff flex, is 64, 65 grams. So it's a couple of grams lighter than the Cobalt. Screw this back in. So it's certainly, I think your kind of initial thing, I know we all kind of lean on things and waggle it, definitely the feeling of stability under the handle. There's definitely a more rigid feel under the hands. So in the same way that using a particular weave, take something like Ventus TR, high quality weave in the butt section, it really stabilizes that feel under the hand. So at the handle end, feels like you can load it pretty strongly, work it pretty strongly, and it stays with you. You don't get any kind of, best way to describe it, bowing. It doesn't feel like it gives way. It feels like you can really put some energy into the handle end. It's definitely doesn't swing quite as tip heavy. I did have a couple of swings with this earlier on, so I know if I go after the bottom end, if I just swing it the same way as I did the Cobalt, I lose a little bit of that drop in with this. So I've got to slightly change my timing to not do that. It's the one thing in terms of the way it loads through. I'd say with the Cobalt you can really feel a certain section, or I can certainly feel a particular section of the shaft give a little bit. This one, it's incredibly consistent all the way down. You don't get a particular bit of the shaft that you think, oh, that really loaded there. Yes, it's stable here, but then the rest of it feels very, very consistent through. And it almost interesting going between the two of them. You always get a little bit more back from this through impact. There's almost a little bit more pop through the ball. But I think that's because rather than the lower midsection giving and the tip being stout, that consistency through the shaft is what gives it that feel of a little bit more recovery. And what you can see happening here, but going a little bit left, is where the fact that the bounce is slightly less than the tip, it allows me just to flip out a little bit. So if I just quieten my hands off a little bit here, still goes left a little bit. Yeah. But you see, I mean, spin really stable. I think the bit when you go up and up and up in grade materials, what I've always felt is it's that consistency of responsiveness all the way through the shaft. You don't get firm handle, firm tip. You just get a flow of load through the shaft. And certainly from a design point of view, it's about the higher grade material they go. They always, the brands and the manufacturers will always talk about energy transfer to the ball. And certainly in their testing, they're saying how, okay, we saw better ball speeds out of it than with other models. So I don't know with the data that there's a bit more positive. There's certainly a little bit lower spin on a couple of those. Now that could be by virtue of it going left. But between the two shafts, yeah, there's a little bit more speed. I think the differential for me is I'd have to either play around with the balance and put a bit more weight in the head to try to time it, or as much as I would dearly love this shaft to work well for me, or there are just other shafts that I'll just swing better. And I think for me going, the swinging the Cobalt first, the dispersion patterns on those shots, if I look at those, slight pulls, neutral to a slight fade, whereas with the AK they're all out the left-hand side. So for me, this shaft's probably there's not quite enough balance in the tip end, and I'm going to have to manage the face a little bit. He might give me a little bit more, as you can see, kind of 3 yards more. But that's currently for me, it's 3 yards more into the left rough. So I'd either have to do a little bit more management of club head weight, or I might just find I time a particular shaft slightly better. And so there's a bit of a marker on that. I'm just going to go back to old faithful.
So and why don't you tell everyone when you're going to do your driver fit?
Depends on shed. I'd like to get it. Now we've got, there are a couple of other shafts that I wanted to get in to have the whole complement to fit with. So like the new Nitro range of the TPTs and that AK, then I'd like to think we can get it done in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We've just got to work out which of the sessions, and I'll probably have to do a little bit of a pre-seeing down because no one wants to see me. But if we do it one of these, by the time we get to the end of the hour, I'm going to be done. So I'll probably have to get it down to 4 or 5 shafts. I can talk about that process at the beginning part. But yeah, next couple of weeks, I think. So if I go back to mine, the one thing that I find with this, I just don't have to control the face on it. So it's a little bit heely, so it's just faded off a little bit, but I can just stand and fire at it. So, and that's the one thing I think, it doesn't matter as much as, yes, I can definitely feel a definite difference in the way the shafts react. And actually in terms of feel through the shaft, I have to say that AK is a beautiful feel. I get scared to hell of a miss left. And if I've got a shaft that allows me to flip it, then it's not worth me going into that. So unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the shaft I end up in. But for somebody who's got a little bit less of a tendency to turn the face over, and if you want basically kind of the best materials out there, then that's going to be a great shaft to test out. But it's very dear. So thank you very much for joining us this Friday afternoon. And tuning in before the long weekend. I hope everyone has a lovely, lovely weekend, whatever you end up doing, and I hope you don't get too wet if you're outdoors. Thanks for all the questions and the interaction. As ever, we're incredibly grateful for that. I'm very grateful that people chose to watch the cleansings out in Greece. That's proper commitment. As James said, any questions you've got, anything else you want us to, anything you want us to do in future lives, tests and things, just send them in. We'll do whatever we can to cover off those. But thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.